Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Against All Enemies. I'm your host, as always, Rick Wilson, joined today by my friend, the great Alex Vindman, the guy who stood up when it counted against Donald Trump in the first administration. And, we were talking a little bit back and forth about this is we're coming up on that 6-month marker. Give me a perspective, since you saw the first time around, how much worse is it now in terms of where Trump's behavior is at, where his brain is at, where the White House is at, than it was in the first administration?
I think in a lot of ways they're not really comparable. I think in the first administration, I kind of, for a long time, I kept saying that Trump doesn't really learn, or he's very, very hard-headed, and it takes him a long time to learn the lessons. But I think in hindsight now, seeing 6 months in, he has learned the lessons. If in the first administration, he was constrained by what he was told he could and couldn't get away with, he's completely unconstrained. And more than that, he's actually been given a license by the Republicans, certainly with the Republican control of the House and Senate, with the Supreme Court, that he could do anything. He just, listened to his comments in response to these deployments of law enforcement and National Guard and the military. I'm the president. I could do whatever I want.
Do whatever I want.
That is the biggest difference between the first and the second administration. He did not think he could do whatever he wanted. He thought he could potentially kind of pull the wool over, get away with things as the president, but he didn't really think he could do it. Now he feels like he could do everything and anything that he wants to do. So what we're seeing is, frankly, a lot more of a dangerous second administration, whether that's the way he's treating our allies, prospective allies with regards to tariffs, and the way he's treating our enemies, and frankly, the way he's treating the American public. Imagine this: he's treating the American public by policing the streets the way he is worse than he is Vladimir Putin, a war criminal. So it's all in all, it's pretty awful.
I mean, I think one other thing about Trump is, I think he knows his clock is running out. He's not healthy. He's not doing well. But I think in some ways he's now trying to just use every lick of power he can put his hands on to put his mark on this country in a way that he might not have had the same opportunity to in the first term. And I think you came into the public's knowledge because you understood what Trump was doing vis Ukraine even before Russia invaded them, but you understood he was trying to engage in this corrupt deal making to get the Ukrainian government to lie about Joe Biden, and you did a whistleblower on it. You called the thing for what it was, and as John Bolton called it, Trump's drug deal. You testified, you told the truth, you took a lot of personal pain for that, you took a lot of attacks for that. You guys have still taken a lot of attacks for that. So since he's gone after Bolton this week, and it's starting to sound like he's going to work his way through the list of Comey and Brennan and Clapper and God knows who else. How you feeling? You feel like you're in the gun sight here again on this guy?
Yeah, I think actually I've kind of got a question back to you on something you said. Do you really it's rhetorical, but do you really think he's a legacy guy? Do you think he's thinking about, the mark he's going to leave? I don't think he thinks that way. I think he thinks about what he could grab right now.
But I think I think he wants his legacy to be he took it all.
Yeah, maybe.
He took it all.
Yeah.
Money, power, everything. Yeah. That he was an unstoppable force. And I think the family is starting to look at this and say, how do we keep the grift going?
Yeah, that sounds about right. With regards to John Bolton, I think he's actually in a unique place, and something that I considered way before he was the FBI ransacked his place. He had a bit of exposure. He basically, I don't necessarily think he did anything wrong, but he did have legal exposure in that he published a book. He didn't get a clearance for it. and the Biden administration kind of waived the persecution that they were that the end of the Trump 1 administration was executing, but something that Trump could revive. I mean, can they in my case, they just, to be frank, they would just have to make stuff up, because I don't have that kind of baggage. I'm pretty, some people might say I'm a bit of a Boy Scout. So I think that doesn't necessarily, prevent them from coming after me by any means. I don't want to mislead.
Right.
I think they are looking for ways to go after folks. They went after, like, they snatched up a clearance for me that wasn't inactive. They went after Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, going after, like, their ability,
companies that they worked for. Right.
Sure. So, I mean, they might look for something, but guess what? I've not been the least bit, neither has Bolton for that matter, but I've not been the least bit restrained in criticizing this administration. Right. I'm not going to be a shrinking violet with regards to criticizing him if they come after me. It was something that I knew going in to potential second Trump administration that it was going to be problematic. And to be frank, I feel these consequences on a regular basis, whether it's an outright retaliation or harassment or anything of that nature. I'm now probably, I mean, some of my relationships have withered as a result of the second Trump administration coming in, because people are more fearful. They're hunkering down. They basically, they're concerned. So yeah, there's already been a number of different challenges to deal with.
I want to ask you something about that I've been thinking about the second administration, that there is a much more overt presence of the sort of J.D. Vance, Darren Beattie, Eldridge Colby types who are much more overtly pro-Putin and pro-Russia than existed in the prior administration. And a lot of them are playing this sort of backroom game of trying to screw over Ukraine, even though the aid has been congressionally mandated, all that stuff. And I think we saw the sort of, well, maybe, I don't know, I'm going to ask you this question. Did we see the peak of that after Putin has just humiliated Trump on this particular exercise? You think they're going to keep trying to screw the Ukrainian people?
It's hard to say that we've seen peak, humiliation for America, and Americans. I don't think so, and that's why I think that question is more appropriate. I would have thought that the Oval Office engagement between Vance, Trump, and Zelensky would have been, close to the peak, and then we had a suspension of support for Ukraine, and then a hard press from both the Ukrainians and the Europeans to try to, fix some of that relationship. This was something different. I actually took something maybe a little unique away from this meeting between Trump and Putin. This meeting is Trump was about as well prepared for this meeting as he could be. He was concerned. He was anxious. That's not something that typically happens.
No, that's true.
He was prepared for it. If you listen to his commentary and the audio interview he gave, he laid out his case. He laid out what he was going to do. He had a game plan. He completely failed on execution. So it's almost the worst case scenario. If he was unprepared, it would be one thing. I think an adversary would be like, okay, well, there would be some ambiguity of how he would respond in a crisis. But he failed in execution in a major test. So I think next time he faces off against Putin, let's say in a really disastrous flashpoint, maybe there's a kind of a military flashpoint or something of that nature.
Sure.
Putin knows that Trump will blink. She knows that Trump will blink. He's already blinked once with regards to the tariff war.
Right.
So I think these folks know that they could eat his lunch. He is weak, and they could do whatever they want with him. So that's what really bothers me, is that he failed on execution.
Watching Putin take over that press conference in Alaska, that's still, after Trump went out of his way to set up all the symbolic honors for Putin, and he was jumping up and down on the tarmac like a child waiting for him, and just watching Putin stick with that classic hard man Russian act, not give a single millimeter. Let's play that clip we have of Trump on the tarmac.
Yeah, that's a close
war criminal.
Yeah, I mean that's right. But he looks like he's treating him like a close friend, an ally, somebody that he's happy and eager to see, not somebody that should be arrested and transferred to The Hague for war crimes.
for ongoing war crimes.
Yeah.
So I mean, where do you read the war right now? I mean, we've talked about this before, and it's it's like Russia has managed to freeze, part of the Eastern Front largely. They can't seem to make a lot more progress. Ukraine can't seem to make a lot more progress of pushing them out. Where do you read the current state of play?
Yeah. So I think the theory is that Russia, in an attritional war, could wear down the Ukrainians. That it could use its its 10
meat waves.
Yeah, meat waves. It's 10 times the size of Ukraine's economy. It's 3.5 times the population. It has this enormous amount of military material. The theory is that they could wear down the Ukrainians and break the Ukrainians. But in fact, I think that Ukraine has more staying power and that Ukraine has a better chance of breaking the Russians. What does that look like?
Say more. Yeah, please.
Yeah. What does that look like? That looks like a war that wears on for probably another year. A war in which did I lose you for a second?
You lost Rick, but hi everyone. I'm Rick's producer, Whitney. Go ahead and continue your thought, Alex, and I'll get Rick back in.
Sure. Yeah, there's some lightning and thunderstorms here, but all right. So just to leave off with, you said say more. So what that looks like is a scenario in which Ukraine is able to hold, wear down, beat down the Russians over the course of a long war, a war that's going to stretch out because the Russians are encouraged. They are encouraged by the fact that they have Trump on their sides. They're encouraged by the fact that there's a chance that the U.S. could suspend all support for Ukraine and that the Europeans might not be able to step in and really float or bolster Ukraine. The reality is Ukraine that's able to fight on certainly for months and likely years on with the support that it's currently enjoying, that will likely be able to buy either itself or through the Europeans resources that it could use to continue to conduct this war, and is likely able to prevent the Russians from achieving any major successful military engagement. So the Russians continue to chip away, get small tracts of land, but at an extremely high cost. This is enormous territory that the Russians are looking to conquer. So it's one in which the staying power, the ability for Russia to actually achieve its objectives, it looks increasingly unlikely. Ukraine does have challenges. They have manpower issues that they have to deal with. They have some leadership issues that they have to deal with. But even in spite of those, the Russians can't seem to get their act together in any substantial way to really make gains on the battlefield. So it's one in which the war continues on, but without the ability of the Russians to achieve decisive aims. So what it might look like is, something that actually does look frozen, where the Ukrainians aren't able to take back territory, the Russians aren't able to advance anymore. There's a scenario in which the Russians overreach, like they did with regards to Kharkiv, and the Ukrainians are then able to achieve some.
Yeah, they've had a couple pretty good days in Kharkiv right now.
They have.
Yeah,
and around Donetsk also, there was this whole the penetration that occurred in one segment of the battlefield that the Ukrainians have managed to kind of dissect and take back that territory, inflicting significant casualties. So it's not one in which Ukraine is able to liberate, swaths of its territory in the most likely scenario, but one in which they're holding their sovereignty remains intact, and the Russians really kind of are bleed out and are unable to continue this war, and then have to figure out what do the terms look like later on.
I've noticed lately that the domestically produced Ukrainian drones that are reaching deep into Russia and hitting energy infrastructure, particularly auto gas and refining capacity, that strikes me as something where Russia has never had an overabundance of those refining capacities. They've always been great at producing a lot of raw material energy wise, but that strikes me as something that is bringing a weird amount of pain to Russians who otherwise would have ignored it or stayed quiet about it.
I think that's true. I think the Ukrainians, in certain regards, because the U.S. has kind of squandered its leverage and squandered the goodwill, are taking a lot more aggressive action. For the previous administration tried to get them to reduce their attacks on energy infrastructure, so it wouldn't kind of mess around with the oil and gas prices. The Zelensky team now, with the Trump administration that is not really supporting, has a lot more latitude to strike these assets. And in certain regards, it's actually interesting. They're going after energy infrastructure that's important to these increasingly liberal states like Slovakia and Hungary, and putting the pressure on those two countries, Hungary in particular, when Hungary's been obstructing Ukraine's EU accession plans. So now I think that these attacks are going to have actually both a military, economic, and a political consequence that's going to be leaning in Ukraine's favor.
Yeah, I think that in some weird ways, not having Sullivan trying to like pick and choose targets for the Ukrainians was terrible, but with Trump, I think a lot of the threats and a lot of the cutoffs and a lot of the behavior from Vance and Trump and others has just given the Ukrainians a much more, because folks, if you underestimate the cleverness of the Ukrainian people at innovation, you are not paying attention to this war, because they are building cheap, fast, effective long-range drones that they're not costing millions of dollars a piece. They're costing $20,000 or $30,000 a piece, and they go and do $100 million worth of damage to an oil refinery.
Yep.
And it's very interesting sort of fourth generation warfare in a lot of ways, because the old Soviet war machine that you and I were familiar with growing up, that is gone. It is back there. I mean, they're pulling artillery shells with horse and buggy now.
Yeah. So I think it may be, you painted a pretty rosy picture. It might even be better than that in certain regards. The Ukrainians are floating about 60% of their war needs. The balance of it made up by acquisitions from allies. These are the drone capabilities are almost entirely indigenous.
Yep.
They are quite cheap. I mean, on the battlefield, they're like $1,000 a pop or less.
Yeah, for the FPVs,
yeah, for a high end stuff, that's quite effective, like fiber optic, guided, so it doesn't get messed with regards to electronic warfare. On the higher end, you've got these longer range fixed wing drones. They just tested and are about to employ a new cruise missile that has a enormous range and a massive warhead, a ton of explosives. Right. That's going to be able to do really, really significant damage. Meanwhile, the Russians are relying on their terror attacks on Ukrainian cities.
Yep.
They have produced a lot more drones to be able to do this, but they can't produce some of the higher end stuff like cruise missiles. They're not really employing any of the armored vehicles. So in certain regards, the Russians are going to be probably on the losing end of this equation for some time, with more pain coming. and the Trump administration seems to not be able to, not either doesn't get it or wants to paint a completely different picture. So like this, they could paint Ukraine into a corner, and that they somehow need to capitulate. So really at odds with reality.
I think a lot of things, Trump has these weird sort of cinematic ideas about what warfare is that are, he thinks Patton was a documentary. And I think a lot of it is he thinks the Russians are just the unstoppable force of Stalingrad and Kursk and everything. It's just not that story anymore. So we have some good news from your family this week. It seems as if our friend Rachel Vindman has stepped up in the world a little bit in terms of a new assignment. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so she's been looking for ways to be helpful to veteran and military family causes, advocating for services for veterans and military families, organizing veterans and military families and amplifying their voices so that those voices that tend to break through, have kind of a cross-partisan appeal, have the ability to communicate on the issues that matter. So with that in mind, she ran for something called the Veteran and Military Family Council, and she's the national chair or co-chair for this council to help better represent veterans and military families. So we were there, and it was wonderful.
Can't think of anybody who'd be better at that. That's outstanding.
17 years as a military spouse with lots of moves under her belt. She definitely
gets it.
She gets it.
She gets it. Well, Alex, listen, I will appreciate you coming on today. We will continue our conversations on this and many more things. But I always appreciate your insight and wisdom in such a broad spectrum of things. And I will talk to you again very soon. Thanks for coming on.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rick.